The Republic of Ecuador, despite its modest size, is considered one of the mega-diverse countries in the world, being the smallest in size of the 17 privileged on this list. And it's no wonder, as the Andes and the Amazon run through such a small territory, in addition to a wide variety of ecosystems that make it an energy powerhouse. Surprising, isn't it? Are you interested in learning about the history of this country? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. Today we have the collaboration of my friend Alejandro from the Power Hypothesis channel, where you will find great videos about geopolitics. I'll leave the link in the description. Various pre-Columbian cultures would settle in the territory of present-day Ecuador. One of the oldest would flourish during the pre-ceramic period, known as Las Vegas, settled in the province of Santa Elena, where about 31 settlements were found. Subsequently, during the formative period, the Valdivia culture would emerge, which developed on the western coast. It is thought to be one of the precursors of pottery in America, and also a society where women, who predominated in the art found, played an important role. New cultures would appear during the regional development period, such as La Tolita, Jamaquaque, Bahia, and Cerro Nario. In this period, agriculture was already massive, metals began to be used, and the social keys of civilizations were stratifying. The last pre-Columbian period is known as the integration or ethnic lordships, where the Monteños stand out, who occupied this territory that includes part of the current Guayas and Manabí, and who, according to the chronicles, would be the first to spot the Spanish ships sailing the Ecuadorian waters. The cultures of this period would be reached by the advance of the Inca Empire, which began to expand from the south, reaching the territory of present-day Ecuador, around 1470 under the command of the Inca Tupac Yupanqui. The first to fall would be the Paltas, settled in the current province of Loja, followed by the Cañares, settled between the current Azuay and Cañar. This culture was characterized by having offered a tough resistance to the Incas, although they eventually ended up falling and submitting to them. The great empire would continue its expansion, incorporating much of the Ecuadorian territory in the Chinchansuyu region. Tupac Yupanqui would found the city of Tomabamba, now Cuenca, where presumably Huayna Capac, the penultimate Inca, was born. As you may know, his two sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar, would start a civil war for the succession of the throne, which would coincide with the arrival of the Spaniards under the command of Francisco Pizarro. Shortly after winning the war, Atahualpa would be captured and executed, and the Inca Empire would be conquered by the Spaniards, who had the support of some ethnic groups subjugated by the Incas, including the Cañares. Following rumors that Atahualpa's treasure was in present-day Quito, two expeditions would be formed under the command of Pedro de Alvarado from the north and Sebastian Belalcazar from the south. The latter would be the founder of Quito, which would be on the border between the governorships of New Castile and Tierra Firme, and would also be the starting point from where the expeditions would depart. But it wouldn't be until 1542 that an official administrative status would be given to the conquered territories that would become part of the Reign of Peru. By this time, several cities had already been founded, such as Manta, Riobamba, Santa Elena, Esmeraldas, Porto Viejo, and Guayaquil in 1537 by Francisco de Orellana. But in essence, Ecuador would begin to take shape with the creation of the province of Quito, after Francisco Pizarro's younger brother, Gonzalo, requested the creation of a court from the King of Spain. Given that by then several cities had already been founded in the surrounding area, and even the Amazon River had been discovered during an expedition from Guayaquil, Pizarro would be the first ruler. As for society, the province of Quito would be no exception, as the population was also defined by social classes, with peninsular Spaniards at the top, followed by the Creoles, who were limited from holding certain public offices. These were followed by the mestizos, a mix of whites and indigenous people, and finally the natives and blacks, brought in as slaves, who, incidentally, would come after the indigenous population was decimated due to diseases. By 1717, in the midst of the organic reforms after which protectionist measures would be implemented in all Spanish colonies in America, the Viceroyalty of New Granada would be created, separating from the Viceroyalty of Peru. and incorporating the captaincy of Venezuela. The province of Quito would be part of it. On the other hand, the government of Guayaquil would be formed in 1764. Remember this fact. With the new imposed reforms added to international events, such as the independence of the United States and the French Revolution, ideals of freedom would begin to emerge both in Quito and in the other territories of the Crown. These ideals would be reflected in works such as those of the thinker Eugenio Espejo. However, the first cry for independence would not occur until 1809, when, according to what was agreed during the Christmas plot, the first governing board of Quito would be formed, which sought to overthrow the royalist power. This board would be quickly discovered, and its members imprisoned and murdered the following year during the August 2nd riot. And yes, this would be an act of barbarism that Simón Bolívar would use to expand the revolution that was spreading throughout all the viceroyalties of America. In Ecuador, it would continue with the arrival of Carlos Montúfar, who would form a second governing board of Quito, initially legal to the crown, but which would again declare that it would not submit to the viceroy of New Granada, thus creating the state of Quito. The royalist forces would not delay in arriving from Lima and Guayaquil, and the ephemeral state of Quito would disappear after the defeat of the Patriot forces in the Battle of Ibarra. Do you remember that I told you about the formation of the Guayaquil government? Well, new Ecuadorian independence movements would not occur until 1820 from this city, where a group led by José Joaquín de Olmedo would expel the royalist authorities, thus giving birth to the free province of Guayaquil with Olmedo as president. After several battles, the Spaniards would finally be defeated in the Battle of Pichincha, where with the support of Gran Colombia and Peru, they managed to annex the rest of present-day Ecuador. Shortly after, this territory would be incorporated into the already formed Gran Colombia, to which the territory of present-day Ecuador would be divided among the departments of Guayaquil, Ecuador, and Azuay. Of course, the latter with border controversies with Peru. Around 1830, the first Ecuadorian constitution would be promulgated, through which the departments of Azuay, Quito, and Guayaquil would unite into an independent state. Ecuador was born under the name of State of Ecuador, with Juan José Flores as its first president. This status would last only 5 years, after which the 1835 constitution would be adopted with the current name of Republic of Ecuador. During this period, Ecuador would face its first war against New Granada, now Colombia, known as the Cauca War, due to border controversies over the provinces of Pasto, Popayan, and Buenaventura. The conflict ended with a beneficial result for Colombia, as it still maintains sovereignty over these territories to this day. With the signing of the Treaty of Pasto, the border would be established at the Carchi River. Although, on the other hand, Ecuador would manage to annex the Galapagos Islands in 1832, President Flores would obtain a second term, in which he would attempt a new modification of the Constitution to be re-elected, which is why the dissidents of his conservative policy would depose him during the March Revolution in search of liberal policies, initiating the Marxist period. In the Marxist era, slavery was abolished with liberal reforms, but there was continuous instability due to power struggles among the nation's elites. In addition, they would face their first conflict with Peru, which occurred after a diplomatic crisis between both countries after Ecuador offered Amazonian territories that were in dispute to its English creditors. Ecuador retreated after Peru obstructed its coasts. The Marxist era would end with the rise to power of Gabriel García Moreno after his victory in the Battle of Guayaquil, after which a new conservative era known as the Garciana era would return, in which some advances were achieved, such as universal suffrage, in addition to promoting educational improvements. It is also worth noting that Ecuador would support Chile and Peru during the Hispano-South American War, which would be the last Spanish intervention in the subcontinent. This period would end with the assassination of President Garcia by his opponents, moving on to what is known as the Progressive Era. This period is known as such due to the influence of the Progressive Party, which had an ideology intermediate between conservatives and liberals, and is considered a transition between the Garcia era and the rise to power of Eloy Alfaro, of liberal cut. Alfaro, who had led the Ecuadorian liberal revolution, would come to power on 2 occasions through coup d'etat. During his term, freedom of expression, secularism, and a progressive modernization of infrastructure would be established. The old fighter, as he was called, would be overthrown and later captured and killed. Regarding territorial disputes, Ecuador would move its border with Brazil to the Tabatinga to Papuris line after the Tobar-Rio Branco Treaty, with the only neighbor with whom disputes would continue being Peru, with whom they would not be resolved until after the Peruvian-Ecuadorian War, in which, through the signing of the Rio de Janeiro Protocol, Peruvians would claim sovereignty over the areas of Cheyenne and Minas. During this period, the governments of José María Velasco stand out, who would proclaim himself president on 5 occasions. His ideology is a bit difficult to define, but what is certain is that it was characterized by marked populism. During his governments, the banana and oil booms would emerge, 2 industries that still characterize the country. Velasco would be overthrown during his last government by the army, marking the beginning of a short military period. Amid internal and external public pressures, the military triumvirate formed would soon resign, returning to the constitutional system in 1979. Here, various governments would follow, succeeded in a democratic manner. Institutional normality would be shattered in 1997 with the dismissal of President Audara Bucaram for mental incapacity, who would govern for less than a year. The next elected president, Yamil Mawad, would meet the same fate in the face of a severe economic crisis due to the collapse of the Ecuadorian financial system. Falling oil prices and suspicions of corruption would also be dismissed. In this crisis, Ecuador underwent severe hyperinflation, depreciating the sucre, the national currency, which was eventually replaced by the dollar. This was the worst financial crisis in the country's history, where more than 500,000 Ecuadorians left the country, mainly to Spain and the United States. The next government, elected by votes of Lucio Gutiérrez, would also not finish its term. Yes, I already sound like a broken record. Gutiérrez, during whose term the armed forces would be accused of selling weapons to the FARC, would be overthrown during the Rebellion of the Outlaws, in which a group of protesters would depose the president. Political stability would not be achieved until the term of Rafael Correa, who would govern for 10 years, being seen by some as a president who provided stability and extensive infrastructure development, and by others as the cause of a large debt, and who reduced freedom of speech. Correa would be succeeded by his former vice president Lenin Moreno, who would cut all political ties with Correa, moving closer to the United States. While Ecuador has achieved some political stability, the fact is that it is currently one of the slowest growing countries in the region. What do you think? Is this model of government the most appropriate for Ecuador to move forward? And that's it for today's video. If you liked it, don't forget to support me with a like and subscribe to my channel. See you next time. Thank you.